And welcome back to Game Time Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Q the Astrologer, and let's talk about Saturn and Aries. So, in this particular episode, I'm going to talk about Saturn and Aries, how it's going to reshape the culture of professional sports. This is not a official podcast episode, so it's just me kind of like talking about Saturn and Aries. So, sit back, relax, take some notes, and let's go ahead and dig in. The reason why I wanted to do this episode is because with Saturn now in the sign of Aries, it made me think back to when Saturn was in Pisces and how the transit of Saturn in Pisces affected the music industry and the film and entertainment industry, because Pisces literally rules cameras, mirrors, film, music, Netflix, all these things, right? And so whenever we have Saturn in the mix, Saturn is going to make us, number one, get down to reality, get grounded in reality, and figure out how to move around in a more constructive, structured, disciplined, focused, reimagined, and responsible way. And so, because I, as an astrologer, have the notion and the understanding of the sign of Aries being that it is talking about sports, it rules, like how we take action, of course, but Mars, the planet that rules Aries, does speak to sports and military and all these things. And that's another reason why, too, like, I'm not going to get political with it. I'm going to make sure I keep it on sports, but I just want to make an example here. With Saturn and Aries, that's why, Trump is, shooting missiles off in Israel right now, because like I said, Mars rules Aries and Mars rules the military and divine masculine energy and going after what you want. And it's basically the energy planet. It's how we like move, how we go about doing things, how we go about initiating things, right? So I'll go ahead and leave that there because I don't want to get political. We're going to stick to the sports topic here. And so the reason I want to do this is because I know, like I said, Mars rules Aries and Mars is talking about sports. And so because Saturn was in Pisces, and we had the whole like writer strike and the film entertainment industry kind of was going through their situation where there were just a lot of like blockages. People were like not getting paid as much, losing their jobs, not getting jobs. Writers kind of reevaluating what they wanted to do. Did they want to stay in LA or move, or in Atlanta and move, or whatever the case may be? And so that got me to thinking about Aries sports, right? And so, we could already tell, last year when they said like last year's draft, 2024 draft was the weakest NBA draft class that they've ever seen in the NBA. And a lot of that has to do with Saturn and Pisces being very close to Saturn and Aries, right? Because when that comment was made, I believe that Saturn and Pisces was in the third decan of the sign of Pisces. Okay. And so what happens there is that when we ingress a planet up the chart and it goes into the third decan, things become a little bit more serious, right? And because that planet is in the third decan, that means that it's getting closer and getting close to the cusp of the next sign. Okay, so Pisces is the 12th sign, and then Aries is the number one sign, right? So it starts all over again. And so whenever we have conjunctions, or when planets are getting within a 10 degree, even a 6 degree orb, I would say would be the strongest orb. That is when we start to see, maybe some activation when it comes to that planet and the sign that it's in. And so, like I said, last year, 2024, was like the weakest draft class. And now we move here. Now we're in 2025. And this is a very strong NBA draft class. If I must say myself, with Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, and the list goes on and on and on. And a lot of that speaks to with Saturn being in Aries, why this draft class is stronger than the draft class of when Saturn was in Pisces. Because the other thing too about Saturn and Pisces, we were kind of seeing the ratings go down, right? In the NBA, there were like talks about the ratings weren't great. No one's watching the NBA All-Star game, all these things. And I want to say that I do feel like these things are going to continue to be talking points along with many other things I'm going to talk about in this video. These things are going to really show up, continue to be a narrative as we go through Saturn and Aries, which is going to be literally from now until April of 2028. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into part one. Part one, I want to talk about Saturn entering into the sign of Aries. Okay. So Saturn entered into Aries May 2025, and it's going to stay here until April of 2028. And so Saturn is the planet of structure, karma, rules, discipline, and it's about reality checks, okay? And Aries, on the other hand, is a fire sign. It's a raw fire sign. It's about action. It's about competition, which is sports related, right? It's about youth, speed, ego, me first type of energy. Think like a warrior, not a diplomat, okay? So when these two energies collide, Saturn and Aries, you get a cosmic boot camp. So Saturn says, I see your talent. Now let's see your discipline when it comes to that talent. It's not enough to just kind of like show up and show out. This is an energy, Saturn and Aries is an energy about, hey, you need to grow up, right? Because again, you got to remember that Aries rules the first house of the personality, the self, right? So I, right? Aries is you, it's I am, right? So you need to grow up. So that is the basis of what Saturn and Aries is all about. Now, how it's going to impact the NBA, if we zoom in on basketball, because guys, I used to play basketball myself, so a lot of my material and my content is going to be centered on NBA, WNBA stuff. When we talk about how it's going to impact professional basketball, because the NBA is one of the most Aries coded leagues out there, we're talking about flashy talent, players with high ego, individual stardom, explosive athleticism, fast pace. And now with Saturn, the planet of slow and steady, into the Aries domain, here's what's going to be coming up. So the number one thing I want to talk about that's coming up is, of course, the injuries, because we've been having a lot of injuries, y'all, right? So I wanted to highlight that. Now with Saturn and Aries, this is why they're going to be slower comebacks, more injuries with slower comebacks. And that is by design. Like I said in my last video, or I think my last episode, when it comes to the superstars that got injured in the playoffs, it's going to be very important not to rush to come back and play. Because here's the thing, Aries rules the head and Aries rules the muscles. And so Saturn, of course, rules restriction. And so this combination could highlight more muscular injuries, right? Fatigue. It could also highlight burnout as well. So we may see teams kind of slow down recovery timelines, which is definitely on brand. And that could get a lot of backlash from fans specifically, right? Like we might be watching the NBA and your favorite player has been injured, and you look up a couple months down the line and you're like, dang, he's still out. He's still sitting out. He's still on the bench kind of thing, right? But see, this is what needs to happen. This is the smart way to do things with Saturn and Aries. We have to make sure that we slow down recovery when it comes to our physical body, because Aries rules the physical body. And Saturn wants us to be disciplined and get serious about load management. So I do believe that with more injuries and slower comebacks, I do believe that there's going to be more strict like league guidelines when it comes to load management and injury timelines, like when to expect the superstar to come back to the floor, and really kind of like slowing down the recovery. I also want to note too that this is also a really good thing because Pluto is in Aquarius, and Aquarius rules technology. So I do think that there's going to be some new like sports technology that comes out that can actually help with the recovery process when it comes to these injuries as well. Pluto is going to, make that happen. It's going to shift things in the right direction so that, there are tests being done on new machines, new data, new science, all that good stuff, so that, you know, with the slower comeback, at least the technology will be so good and so intricate that when the superstars do come back, it'll be a good comeback and won't have to worry necessarily about, another injury taking place. So we can expect sports medicine and conditioning to evolve with, that Pluto and Aquarius element there. And then also with Saturn in Aries, because Saturn is going to demand innovation as well as Pluto and Aquarius. But Saturn is going to demand this innovation through pressure. So it's going to be a lot of pressure on I also want to say like even trainers, like training staff, strength training staff. When I talked about Saturn and Pisces and how people were getting laid off and writers strike and all that, I even can see that there might be strength trainers or people who, help the athletes to condition their bodies. They could be getting laid off. There could be more eyes on them, and hey, potentially they could go on strike. These are just some of the things that I see that could potentially happen. The energy is ripe for that, and it's just going to be a wait and see kind of thing. So definitely we got to keep our eye on that. So that was the first thing I wanted to talk about. The second thing that I want to talk about when it comes to Saturn and Aries that we have to kind of keep our eye on is the grind culture over the hype culture. Okay. So I want to say, like, these new kids that are coming into the league, like Cooper Flag and, Ace Bailey and all that, these, top 5, top 10 athletes coming in, Saturn in Aries, it doesn't care about how many followers you have or like how many dunks you post on IG. It's really going to be about the work ethic and the longevity and the mental toughness. So for example, right, I was just watching something on ESPN through YouTube on Cooper Flag, and there was an interview that he did recently, and I learned a lot about this kid. Like, his mom used to play basketball, and his mom gave him a bit of advice, which the gist of the advice was that, when you walk into a gym and you're the best one there, it's time to kind of like elevate and go to the next level kind of thing. So what that said to me is that this kid, Cooper Flag, has a strong work ethic. His family comes, it's a basketball family. Um, the work ethic of outworking your competitors is like deeply ingrained in this kid. And so I think also with him, I'll do a separate episode on him, but I think that he is going to be like the change maker, right? It's so on brand for him because of his work ethic and his mental toughness, right? He comes from that. That's why he was number one. I mean, literally, the kid went up a high school class. So literally, he should be coming into college this year, but he went up a class coming out of high school, and this year he's entered into the draft, right? So he's already like ahead of his time with the work ethic, putting in that work and really just like grinding it out. So he's a great example, and he is a great example of a clear divide between players who are all like flashy and don't have any fundamentals, which is completely something that I have seen as well for myself. Like, I used to coach kids one-on-one, and I stopped last year in 2024 because of the culture of sports was so different from how it was when I first started my coaching business. Now, when I say coach, I used to have a personal training sports business, right? I still have it, but I don't really do anything with it. It's just kind of like sitting there, right? And so if I ever come across people who want to train with me, sure, I'll do it. But I'm not like going after it. I'm not making it a priority like I did back in 2017 when I first started that business. And the reason is because, yeah, it is a overhyped culture where kids just wanted to be flashy. This is something that I saw in 2024 specifically, which really turned me off when it came to wanting to coach kids. I just like literally just like put an end to it, because as a coach, especially when you're coaching one-on-one like that, and you can see that these kids do not want to learn the fundamentals. No shade. They don't want to learn the fundamentals. They want to watch OTE YouTube channel and just, watch Luka Doncic and do the step back, and then they just mimic the step back and just shoot threes all day. What I really saw as a coach was that these kids were not interested in learning the fundamentals. They just wanted to do what they saw on YouTube, versus put in the hard work when no one's watching. You know what I mean? And so, it just became, for me as a coach looking at these things, it just became so performative. Like it just made me sick to my stomach, to be completely honest. And it turned me off from coaching. So I had the final goodbye to my coaching business last year in 2024 because of that. But now, guys, with Saturn and Aries, it's about to be a whole new ball game, because players like Jimmy Butler, Kawhi, if he's healthy, or Jason Tatum, they're going to have to really embody this Saturn archetype of tough, serious, and focused nature. And those who are not going to embody the tough, serious, focused nature with Saturn and Aries are not going to be looked at anymore. No tea, no shade. Ja Morant was my favorite player, but the antics, I don't really care anymore, and a lot of people are kind of like looking that way. Same thing with Zion Williamson. He's been, guys, like a few months ago, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, he was being called a bust. He was being labeled a bust. And he was being labeled a bust right around when Saturn was in Pisces, around the last 2 degrees. I remember it very vividly on Fox Sports. Shout out to what's his name on Fox Sports. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but their stuff is always coming up on my timeline on YouTube. But he was literally calling Zion Williamson a bust. And then they had people call into the show, and there were people agreeing with him, y'all. And I agree too. But see, this is what I'm talking about with Saturn and Aries right now. When these people come back to play this season, they better toughen up. They better get serious, and they better get focused. This is something that I saw too with even Ant-Man. Him, people, kind of making jokes about him not being the next MJ, but he is a young player. So we kind of got to give him some slack here, but he is a serious and a tough player. I don't think he's going to be affected in any way. Jason Tatum won't be affected. Jimmy Butler, all these people who really take this thing serious. But people like Zion Williamson, who are like doing things off the court and not taking it serious, will be labeled a bust, will be, scrutinized and criticized for their play if they're not showing up as taking their craft seriously and working on their game and being injured all the time, right? So that was the second thing I want to talk about. Now, the third thing I want to talk about is aggression, okay? A reckoning with aggression when it comes to Saturn and Aries. So Aries rules our fighting spirit. But when Saturn is here, that can create impulsive energy, okay? And then with Saturn here as well, that impulsive energy is going to get checked at the door. So we can expect, things like if they're on court fights and stuff like that, cracking down on that, really stopping that. I really feel like it's going to get worse. Like we already kind of, some of us who really are like fans of the NBA call this like the soft era. It could even get even worse, guys, with Saturn and Aries, like crackdowns on things like texts and flagrants, reckless plays and stuff like that. The NBA might revise rules around physicality even more so, or another thing that I could see happening is like they could fine players harder for off-court misconduct. And see, this is what the heck I'm talking about, like with Zion Williamson and these antics. And even Ant-Man with the whole getting this woman pregnant and all this stuff. I mean, with Saturn and Aries, these players are going to be in for a rude awakening because they could get fined for off-court activities even more so. It can even get even more like petty and nitpicky, right? Like really like a magnifying glass on stuff that normally wouldn't have got fined for off-court misconduct, but it can now be getting fined, okay? Because there's a karmic undertone with Saturn where actions have consequences, just period. So if Aries rules the first house of our body and our self and our personality, then these athletes are going to have to really, quote unquote, mind their personality and how they're coming off and really like, kind of, what's the word I want to use? Like get serious about how you're carrying yourself kind of energy out in the world, out in the public. Otherwise, actions have consequences. So just in summary, a reckoning around aggression could happen where we can expect maybe, like I said, fines for harder off the court misconduct, right? Or like even crackdowns on things like on court fights, texts and flagrants or reckless plays, flopping and all that stuff, these kinds of things, right? So the next thing I want to talk about is the individualism getting tested, right? Because Aries is the individual. Aries is the independent. Aries is the self. Aries represents I am, me, mine. But Saturn is about responsibility and leadership. So stars who've coasted on ego, this is what I'm talking about. Stars who have coasted on their ego, they might feel the squeeze, in the league will look for true leaders like Cooper Flagg, for example, or people who just are going to show that they work hard. SGA, Shea Gillis Alexander, is also a really good example of this, where, I mean, he came back out of nowhere and just like left it all out on the floor, right? Became the NBA MVP, won a championship, won a ring, became the championship MVP as well, the Western Conference MVP as well, right? So he is also a good example of this, where he is a true leader. And so the next thing I want to say about this same topic with the individualism is this: you'll see young stars rise to the occasion. And if they don't rise to the occasion, they could collapse under pressure. It all depends on their individual natal chart, right? So Saturn is not going to let anyone fake leadership anymore. Okay. It's about proving yourself, like Anthony Edwards, right? SGA has already done that. Tyrese Halliburton has done that. It's about, for these young players that are coming into the league and that are young still, like under 25, under 30, that, we really look at like, they really got something going. It's about them stepping into their next level mentally. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to talk about for Saturn and Aries is league-wide accountability. So this is also going to impact collective bargaining, load management policies, I feel, and also like how teams handle long-term contracts. So we might see stricter vetting of coaching staff. Like I said, coaching staff, strength and conditioning staff, more strict vetting of that, okay? Being accountable for these players getting injured, or, minutes and how they're showing up. We could also see stricter vetting of new performance clauses or stronger player development programs and stuff like that. Like the G League could go through a whole like reorganizing, right? So think about this, like it's going to look like less tolerance for distractions and more accountability from top to bottom. Okay. So These strength and conditioning coaches, I mean, if you know someone, tell them to, like, make sure they get on their P's and Q's. The Saturn in Aries is not playing. You guys got to understand, like, when we were talking about the soft era of the NBA and the ratings going down, Saturn is now in a new sign. And so there's going to be some changes. We're also going to have like Uranus in Gemini soon, y'all. Jupiter's in Cancer. I mean, 2025 is the number 9 year. You add up 2 plus 2 plus 5, you get the number 9. And so the number 9 is about endings and new beginnings. So there's shifts happening this year. And then by the time we get to 2026, which is the number 1 year, we're starting that new beginning that we are kind of trying to iron out. And this is the same thing that goes for the NBA. The NBA is also dealing with number 9 energy, right? Like shifting what's not working anymore. They're kind of going through some changes, right? Everything is going through changes. Aviation, politics, we in our own personal lives, we're going through changes. It's the number 9 year, so that we can emerge as leaders in the year 2026. And that's what the NBA is doing. They're going to have to work through shifting the All-Star game, the G League, coaching staff, strength coaches, all that good stuff, okay? All right, so which brings me now to my next kind of like point that I want to make here. There's going to be winners, there's going to be losers when we talk about Saturn and Aries, okay? So let's talk about who's going to thrive. Let's talk about the winners, okay? So who's going to thrive here is players, coaches that are hardworking, and they're no nonsense. We want to see no nonsense veterans, defensive specialists, role players are going to really thrive. I really feel like they're going to thrive. And even players with fire and earth placements, with a lot of fire and earth placements, like I'm saying, like Aries, Leo, Sag, Capricorn, Taurus, okay, Virgo as well. And also those who are going to thrive is those with discipline over their egos, okay? Now let's talk about the losers of Saturn and Aries, those who are going to struggle. And these are going to look like players who rely on strictly athleticism, drama magnets like Zion Williamson. It's a wrap, bro. Like, you can't be out here doing that. People are calling you a bust. Okay? And this is so Saturn and Aries. Other people that might struggle, young stars with no work ethic. This also reminds me of like Ace Bailey, right? Like I'm watching on my feed on YouTube, on ESPN, that he's not taking any workouts from teams unless they're going to make him the number 1 option. He's playing a dangerous game. And I'll just kind of leave that one there. Another subsector of people that are going to probably be struggling is any teams with a fragile team dynamic. Okay, so it's going to be interesting because there's a lot of trades happening right now in the postseason, and we'll see what happens next year. And so if pieces aren't moved in the right place, then we can see that those teams with not so great team dynamics could really suffer and struggle. Okay. All right. So next thing, outside the NBA, a cultural shift in all sports is going to occur, in my opinion. So, we focus on basketball a lot on my channel, but I want to say like Saturn and Aries is going to impact football, soccer, MMA, the Olympics, all high stakes, high speed sports. Okay. And so with Saturn and Aries, we're going to see aggression being regulated. Youth culture will face limits as well, like the youth sports culture. Youth sports is going to go through a shift as well, like no more showboating, like really working hard, okay? This is going to be a thing. I also feel like, our legends, our sports legends will be forged through struggle, not hype, okay? So in short, the era of, this prima donna, pretty type of play style in NBA, it's going to shift with Saturn and Aries, where it's going to be more gritty, where these young kids that have work ethic are going to come out and take people's heads off, essentially. in my opinion. This is what I'm seeing in the chart. So in closing, guys, Saturn in Aries is about earning your stripes. It's not about glamour like Pisces. It's not always fun, but it's going to build real legacy. Okay. So this kind of makes me think about like the whole Bronny thing. Like Bronny, like LeBron knew what he was doing trying to get his son into the NBA ASAP. Because I don't really feel like if Bronny would have entered into this draft class, he would not have been drafted. I don't care who LeBron thinks he is. It wouldn't have happened because Saturn in Aries is about earning your stripes. This kid did not earn his stripes. It's not real legacy. So, in sports, as in life, that's what lasts, right? Building real wealth, building your skill, beating on your craft, right? But now that Bronny is in the league, I do feel like, he'll work hard. He's probably working hard right now, but I'm just saying, like, if he would have entered into this draft class, this is a very strong draft class, it wouldn't have really worked out for him. But anyway, guys, thank you guys so much for tuning in to Game Time Astrology Podcast. Please follow, share, leave a comment on this episode if it really, spoke to you in any way. And I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.